The galaxy was vast, beautiful, and full of surprises, but to Jax, it was just another workday. The hum of his space taxi was a comforting constant as he navigated the trade lanes between planets. His latest passenger was unlike any he'd encountered before, tall, elegant, and otherworldly. Her pale, silvery skin shimmered faintly in the cabin's dim light, and her large liquid eyes seemed to take in everything at once. She'd introduced herself with a name that sounded like a soft breeze and a roaring fireplace. He'd shortened it to Lyra for simplicity. She'd raised an eyebrow at the abbreviation but said nothing. The trip was supposed to be routine, a quick hop to an orbital station where Lyra would catch a larger transport. Jax's job was just to get her from point A to point B. But routine had a way of unraveling in the cold, indifferent expanse of space. It started with a flicker on the dashboard, a warning light that Jax initially dismissed. Space taxis weren't exactly the pinnacle of engineering, and he was used to dealing with the occasional glitch. But when the flicker turned into a cascade of alarms and the controls became unresponsive, he realized this was more than a minor malfunction. They burst out of the sidewall of the slipstream highway and into open space. "Strap in," he said, his voice tight as he fought with the controls. Lyra complied without question, her expression unreadable but calm. The ship shuddered violently, and through the viewport, Jack saw the icy surface of a planet moon rushing up to meet them. "Hold on," he shouted as the ground loomed closer. The taxi's emergency systems engaged at the last second, deploying a thin layer of cushioning foam inside the cabin as the ship slammed into the frozen wasteland. The impact was bone-jarring, and for a moment, everything was a blur of noise and motion. When the world stopped shaking, Jax groaned and pried himself out of his seat. The cabin was tilted at an awkward angle, and frost was already forming on the shattered viewport. Lyr was unbuckling her harness with practiced ease, her movements graceful despite the chaos. "You okay?" he asked, his voice shaky. "Uninjured," she replied, her voice a melodic contrast to the harsh surroundings. "Your vessel, however, is beyond repair." Jax grimaced. "Yeah, no kidding." He grabbed a thermal jacket from the emergency kit and tossed another to Lyr. She held it up, inspecting it as if it were some alien artifact, which to her, it probably was. "Put it on," he said. "This place looks colder than a cryochamber." Lyr draped the jacket over her shoulders, her silvery skin catching the faint light. "Your technology is primitive," she remarked, but there was no malice in her tone. Jax chose to interpret it as an observation rather than an insult. Stepping outside, they were met with a stark, frozen landscape. Endless plains of ice stretched in all directions, broken only by jagged spires of crystalline formations that glittered like frozen fire. The air was thin and bitingly cold, each breath forming clouds of vapor. "We'll need shelter," Jack said, already scanning the horizon for anything that might serve as a refuge. The ship's remains offered little protection, and the cold was already seeping through his jacket. "How far are we from civilization?" Lyra's eyes closed briefly, her head tilting as if listening to something only she could hear. "Far," she said at last. "Too far." Jax cursed under his breath. "Figures. All right, let's see what we've got." He rummaged through the ship's emergency supplies, coming up with a simple medical scanner and a small water purifier. The space for emergency food rations was empty. It wasn't much, certainly not enough for 2 people to survive long in this environment. Fucking corporate cutbacks. This was meant to be a short trip, he muttered, shaking his head. "We'll have to find another way to make it." Lyra watched him silently, her expression inscrutable. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "We will survive. Together." Jax met her gaze, something in her tone sparking a faint glimmer of hope in his chest. "Yeah," he said. "Together." The wind howled around them as they began to move, their breath mingling in the icy air. Unbeknownst to them, the frozen wasteland was about to test the limits of their endurance, their understanding of each other, and the very nature of survival itself. They trudged through the endless expanse of ice, their progress slow but steady. Jax's breath came in ragged puffs, and he glanced at Lyra, who moved with an eerie grace, seemingly unaffected by the cold. As the hours passed, the wind began to pick up, carrying with it a biting chill that made Jax's fingers ache despite his gloves. Just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, Lyra stopped and pointed to a dark shape in the distance. "There," she said. Jax squinted, his heart leaping at the sight of a small cave entrance nestled in the side of a jagged ice formation. "Good eyes," he muttered, picking up the pace despite his fatigue. The cave was shallow but provided enough cover to shield them from the relentless wind. Inside, Jax activated the emergency shelter, a compact device designed for survival situations. The small pod unfolded into a makeshift room, its self-contained heater humming to life as the walls inflated to provide insulation. However, the built-in lights flickered and died, leaving them in dim twilight. "Of course," Jax grumbled, shaking his head. "At least the heater works." Lyra sat cross-legged on the floor, her gaze steady as she watched him. "This will suffice." Jax sank down beside her, rubbing his hands together to warm them. "Water, heat, and air are covered," he said. "But we're out of luck when it comes to food." Lyra tilted her head, her expression contemplative. "We will adapt," she said simply. Jax sighed, leaning his head back against the insulated wall. "I hope you're right," he murmured. Despite the dire circumstances, he felt a flicker of reassurance in her calm demeanor. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Many hours passed in the cave, the warmth of the shelter fighting back the biting cold that seeped in from the icy landscape outside. Jax and Lyra sat across from each other, an awkward silence falling into the space between. Jax cleared his throat and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "So, Lyra, where were you headed before all this?" He gestured vaguely toward the cave entrance, the memory of their crash still fresh in his mind. Lyra's large eyes met his, reflecting the faint glow of the heater. "To the central starport. I was en route to a diplomatic summit," she said, her tone calm but tinged with a subtle weariness. "My people seek alliances with other species." Jax nodded. "Diplomat, huh? Guess that explains the whole poised under pressure thing." "And you?" she asked, her head tilting slightly. "Your role?" "Space taxi driver," Jax said with a wry smile. "Not exactly glamorous, but it pays the bills." "Usually." Lyra studied him for a moment before speaking. "Your resourcefulness saved us. That is more valuable than glamour." Jax chuckled softly. "I'll take that as a compliment." Hay fell into a companionable silence. Once again, the only sound was the steady hum of the heater. Jax's stomach growled, breaking the quiet, and he shifted uncomfortably. "Sorry. Guess I'm not as good at pretending I'm not hungry. I hadn't eaten anything before we left. I was going to get lunch at the station." Lyra's expression softened. "Your body requires sustenance. It is only natural." "Well, unless you've got some diplomatic snacks stashed somewhere, I'm open to suggestions," Jax said, half joking. Lyra looked thoughtful, her gaze drifting toward the emergency shelter's small storage compartment. "We have water and heat," she said. "These are essential. For sustenance, we must find a solution soon." Jax sighed, letting his head fall backwards against the inflated side of the shelter. "Yeah, no kidding. This place isn't exactly overflowing with grocery stores." Time dragged on, a full day had passed and the gnawing hunger grew harder to ignore. Jax leaned back against the insulated wall, his energy waning. Lyra sat with her eyes closed, seemingly meditating, her stillness both calming and unnerving. Eventually, Jax spoke again, his voice low. "You don't seem as bothered by hunger. Is that like a thing for your species?" Lyra opened her eyes, her expression serene. "My physiology allows me to endure longer without nourishment," she said. "But I too will weaken with time." Jax frowned, his stomach twisting, not just from hunger but from the weight of their situation. "Guess we'd better hope that adapt plan of yours kicks in sooner rather than later." Lyra gave him a faint smile. "We will endure, Jax. Together." Her words carried a quiet certainty that made him feel, if only for a moment, that they might just make it through this after all. As the hours stretched on, Jax found himself absently fiddling with the scanner from the emergency kit. The device was meant for basic environmental assessments, checking air quality, detecting nearby resources, and identifying potential hazards. But as his stomach growled for the umpteenth time, an idea sparked in his mind. "Hey, this thing can scan for minerals and nutrients," he muttered, sitting upright. "Maybe we can use it to figure out what we're missing and see if the cave has anything useful." Lyra, who had been sitting in meditative silence, opened her eyes and observed him curiously. "A logical course of action," she said with a nod. Jax activated the scanner, pointing it at himself first. The small screen displayed a complex readout of his biological composition. It highlighted essential nutrients his body was currently lacking, along with a blinking warning that his energy reserves were dangerously low. "Well, no surprises there," he said with a dry chuckle. "I'm running on fumes." Next, he aimed the scanner at Lyra. The device hummed softly, its screen lighting up with a detailed analysis. Jax leaned closer to read the results, his eyebrows shooting up in surprise. "What the?" he muttered, blinking at the screen. The scanner indicated that Lyra's unique physiology not only contained a wealth of nutrients but also matched many of the deficiencies in his own body. In short, she was a complete source of sustenance for him. Lyra noticed his expression and tilted her head. "What did you discover?" Jax hesitated, unsure how to phrase it. This might sound weird, but according to this thing, you could, sustain me. Like, nutritionally." Lyra's silvery eyebrows lifted slightly, though she didn't seem shocked. Instead, she extended a hand toward the scanner. "May I?" Jax handed it over, watching as she turned the device on him. The scanner beeped softly, and Lyra studied the readout, her lips curving into a faint smile. "The results are mutual," she said. "Your biology would likewise provide what I require." Jax blinked. "Wait, you mean we could feed each other?" Lyra nodded, her expression calm and matter-of-fact. "It appears so." Jax ran a hand through his hair, trying to wrap his head around the revelation. "Okay, so that's good news, right? I mean, it's weird news, but it's still good news." Lyra's gaze softened. "Survival often requires adaptation," she said. "This situation is no exception." Jax chuckled nervously, his mind racing with questions. "I guess this is what you meant by we'll adapt. I just didn't think it'd be like this." Lyra's serene demeanor was almost reassuring as she responded. "Our existence depends on finding solutions, even unconventional ones." Jax exhaled, leaning back against the insulated wall of the shelter. "Well, I can't argue with that. Let's figure out how we're gonna do this." The icy wind howled outside the cave, but inside, a strange sense of hope flickered between them. It wasn't the solution Jax had expected, but in the face of starvation, it might just be the one they needed. Jax scratched the back of his head, his cheeks warming despite the cold. "So, where do we start?" "I mean, I've never exactly been in a situation where my survival depended on another person like this." Lyra studied him with her usual calm, her large liquid eyes glinting in the dim light. "Our bodies already provide a solution," she said, her voice steady. "The secretions on our skin contain the nutrients we require. You produce salt through perspiration. I produce sucrose through my epidermal glands." Jax blinked, taken aback. "Wait, are you saying we just lick each other?" Lyra nodded, entirely unbothered by the notion. "Precisely. This exchange is efficient and ensures minimal waste." He opened his mouth to respond but found himself momentarily speechless. It wasn't the strangest thing he'd ever heard. Working in a space taxi had exposed him to plenty of oddities, but this definitely ranked high on the list. "Well," he finally managed, "I guess that makes sense." "Kinda brilliant, actually." Lyra tilted her head. "Your hesitation suggests discomfort. Is this practice taboo among your species?" Jax chuckled awkwardly. "Not exactly taboo, just unusual. But hey, survival's survival. I'm not gonna let a little weirdness stop us from staying alive." Lyra's serene expression softened slightly, and she extended her hand toward him. "Then let us begin." Jax hesitated for only a moment before moving closer. "Okay," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "How do we, Lyra gestured toward his forearm. "Your perspiration contains the salt I require. I will start here." Jax watched as she leaned forward, her movements smooth and deliberate. Her tongue, warm and surprisingly soft, brushed against his skin. He shivered, not from the cold but from the unexpected sensation. Lyra straightened, her expression thoughtful. "Adequate," she said simply. "Your turn." Jax exhaled and leaned toward her, his gaze flicking to her silvery arm. Her skin seemed almost luminous in the dim light, and he hesitated for a fraction of a second before pressing his tongue to her forearm. A faintly sweet taste, like diluted honey, met his tongue. "Not bad," he admitted, pulling back. "Kinda weird, but not bad." Lyra gave a small nod. "We should ensure thorough coverage. Both of our bodies require sustained nourishment." Jax ran a hand through his hair, laughing softly. "Thorough, huh? All right, let's do this." The two of them worked methodically, trading turns as they licked the exposed areas of each other's skin. Despite the inherent strangeness of the act, Jax found himself growing accustomed to the rhythm of it. The warmth of Lyra's skin, the faint sweetness of her secretions, it all became part of the surreal routine they were building together. As the hours passed, their hunger began to subside, replaced by a curious sense of connection. The act of sharing nutrients wasn't just practical, it was intimate in a way Jax hadn't anticipated. He glanced at Lyra, who met his gaze with a calm that bordered on soothing. This is working, Jack said, his voice tinged with amazement. Lyra inclined her head. Adaptation often yields unexpected results. Jax grinned, shaking his head. You know, if someone told me yesterday morning that I'd crash land on an ice planet and end up licking an alien for survival, I'd have laughed in their face. Lyra's lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile.
And yet here we are.
Yeah, Jack said, leaning back against the shelter wall.
Here we are.
The wind howled outside the cave, but inside they had warmth, water, air, and improbably, a way to sustain each other. Against all odds, they were surviving. Together. As they continued their exchange, the initial awkwardness between Jax and Lyra faded. The rhythmic act of sustaining each other became less strange, almost meditative. Each moment spent closer than Jax had ever imagined being with anyone, let alone an alien, drew them into an unspoken understanding. Their movements grew more fluid, less hesitant. Jax found himself focused on the way Lyra tilted her head, exposing more of her skin for him. Her gestures were deliberate, practical, but there was something gentle in them, too, something that made him feel oddly seen. You're thorough, Jax commented with a nervous chuckle as Lyra moved to the curve of his neck. I have to be, she replied, her voice soft yet unwavering. Survival requires precision. Her words were matter-of-fact, but there was a warmth in her tone that sent a shiver down his spine. He tilted his head instinctively, giving her better access. When her tongue brushed the sensitive skin of his neck, he swallowed hard, his breath catching. Jax tried to focus, forcing himself to return the gesture. He leaned toward her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. Lyra's skin was smooth, cool against his lips as he followed the line of her neck. Her unique sweetness lingered on his tongue, an unexpected comfort in the starkness of their situation. The gap between them shrank. Lyra leaned closer, her breaths faint against his skin. Jax felt his heart racing, though whether it was from the intimacy of the moment or sheer survival adrenaline, he wasn't entirely sure. Their movements slowed, each small gesture filled with more weight than the last. When his lips brushed hers, it wasn't deliberate, at least, not at first. It was the natural result of their closeness, their mutual exploration. The touch was soft, fleeting, like the whisper of the wind outside their shelter. Jax froze, his mind blank, but Lyra didn't pull away. Instead, she paused, her dark eyes meeting his, searching. Jax, she said quietly, her voice holding the faintest note of curiosity, was that an intentional action? He blinked, struggling to find his voice. I don't think so. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the heat rise in his face. But I didn't mind it. Did you? Lyra tilted her head, her gaze thoughtful. It was different, she admitted. But not unpleasant. A nervous laugh escaped him. Not unpleasant, huh? That's a glowing review. Her lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile, and before either of them could second-guess, they leaned into each other once more. This time, their lips met fully, the connection warm and lingering. It wasn't rushed or awkward, but something that felt both natural and extraordinary. Two beings, from two worlds, finding a moment of shared understanding amidst the chaos. When they parted, Jax found himself grinning, despite everything. Well, he said, his voice light, guess we're more compatible than I thought. Lyra's expression softened, her usual calm giving way to something more vulnerable. Survival often leads to unexpected outcomes. Jax chuckled, resting his forehead lightly against hers. You can say that again. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside their small shelter, the cold seemed a little less biting, the darkness a little less oppressive. Together, they had found not only a way to endure, but also a connection neither had expected. Just as Jax was about to speak, the medical scanner emitted a sharp, insistent beep, cutting through the quiet of their small shelter. Both of them turned toward it, Lyra's brows furrowing in curiosity while Jax leaned over to read the display. What now? Jax muttered, tapping the screen. The scanner pulsed and emitted a report. New nutrient source detected. High-protein compounds located. Proximity, immediate. Jax frowned, scrolling through the scanner's analysis. It's picking up proteins, from us, he said, glancing at Lyra. She tilted her head, her expression calm. He gestured at the scanner. The device is designed to analyze organic matter for survival purposes. It's saying we're both carrying more nutrients than just salt and sugar. Specifically, proteins. His voice trailed off as the realization struck him, his eyes widening. He glanced down into his lap and let out a short laugh. Lyra studied his reaction, her expression unwavering. You have determined the source. Jack swallowed, his face heating.
Yeah. It's, our skin again.
Or rather, areas not currently exposed. He rubbed the back of his neck. The scanner's picking up proteins from sweat glands and, he coughed.
Other parts of us.
Lyra's gaze didn't falter. Efficiency demands we utilize all available resources, she said, her tone as matter-of-fact as ever. She stood gracefully, her hands moving to the clasp of her outer garment. Wait, Jack stammered, holding up his hands.
You're just gonna?
Lyra paused, her liquid-like eyes meeting his. Our survival depends on maximizing nutrient exchange, she said simply. Cultural discomfort serves no purpose here. Jack sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose.
Right.
No room for modesty when you're trying to stay alive. Lyra and Jax fully disrobed and sat facing each other, a wide smile on Jax's face and a slight smirk on Lyra's. You have a very nice shape, Jax, Lyra said, looking him up and down fully, casually turning her head side to side. You are beautiful. Jax said breathlessly. Sorry, I mean you are very nicely shaped. A faint glow appeared across Lyra's cheeks and for the first time Jax realized she was blushing. We are very compatible, it seems. You are shaped similarly to males of my species, she said, biting her lower lip in a very human way, although larger than I have seen before. It was Jax's turn to blush. He glanced down at the meeting point of Lyra's very long legs. She noticed and slowly let her knees fall to each side, allowing her female shape to be displayed. Wow, Jax said quietly. It is, he breathed deep and slow as his heart rate spiked. Well, it's perfect, to be honest. I have never seen anything as stunning as you. Lyra pulled Jax close and kissed him once more. She looked deep into his eyes and whispered, Do I have your permission to gain some nutrients?
Yes, please.
Jax blurted out. The two then spent the next few hours obtaining the fuel they needed from each other in the most enjoyable way possible, both providing the sustenance into the eager mouth of the other multiple times. Later, they lay cuddled around each other, softly kissing and licking each other in happy and relaxed ways. How long do you think we can do this? Jax asked. This can't be sustainable long term. We could do this for the rest of our lives. Lyra said flatly, making direct eye contact with Jax, her sad eyes showing the depth and reality of their situation. She held his gaze for several moments until her laughter broke the tension. That was really dark, Jax said, through his laughter. He kissed her shoulder once more and gave it a little push. I think this could last for months if that is what is needed, Lyra said, this time being much more serious. But I do not think that it will come to that. I am sure that a search party is already looking for us. I had an important meeting and it would have been noticed that I was absent from it. Damn, I was hoping to spend those months with you, Jax said through his smile. This is the best camping trip I have ever been on. I need a full-time driver, Jax. Lyra said with sincerity. It would be wise to keep an emergency food source with me at all times. What do you say? Do you accept my proposal? Wait, before I say yes, can you define what you mean by proposal? Jax asked, hoping he wasn't misunderstanding. That word can have multiple meanings on my planet.
Oh, I see.
I mean that I would like to make you my life mate. I believe you call it marriage on Earth. I think having someone by my side who can survive a clearly sabotaged taxi, landing it in such a practiced and safe way, keeping a cool head, saving my life, and kissing so very well, is someone I would like to keep around. She met his gaze with earnesty in her eyes. Jax looked at Lyra, really looked, and without hesitation simply said, This might be crazy, but I would like nothing more than exactly that for the rest of my life. Lyra smiled, and the faint glow once again appeared across her cheeks. She wrapped his arm around her as she cuddled her back into his chest. They lay in the quiet happiness until both had fallen into a deep satisfied sleep. They awoke hours later when the lights of the search vessel lit up their cave. A voice called out, strong and authoritative.
Director, are you here? Are you safe?
Director, Jax asked as they began to quickly dress. Director of Interplanetary Cooperation, she said flatly. I was trying to get to the station secretly. There are individual groups that would prefer that I not succeed. I used your taxi in hopes of not being targeted. I was wrong. So you do mean that my taxi was sabotaged, like for real?
Jax asked. Yes, she said again.
She held out her hand. Want to help me save the galaxy?
Hell yes,
Jax said, intermingling his fingers into hers. Hand in hand they hurried into the rescue ship, headed off towards conflicts unknown. But that is a story for next time. If you would like to hear more, please leave a message and subscribe. Until then, goodbye for now.